What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. So just a quick reminder, there won't be a Newswave tomorrow or Friday. We will be back here, though, Monday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern time for Newswave as usual. It's just tomorrow's Christmas, then the day after Christmas. Figure let's make it a 4-day weekend. I will have videos going live, though, each morning at the usual 8 a.m. time is the goal here. So there will at least be something to watch each morning. So some fun stuff, I think. But we just still have a few things to go over ahead of the holiday, though. That does include Microsoft now. Seems like at least making good on a deal that they signed with Nintendo years ago, here pretty soon, with Activision Blizzard, of course. And we also have Toys for Bob with their game that they're currently in development with right now, maybe leaking out a bit early. I think some longtime fans will be excited to see this one. And with the hardware prices going up, people are even turning to cloud gaming now. But how much control do these different companies like Nvidia have? Quite a bit. And people are really starting to realize that now. With a recent change, we'll go over all of that and more. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button. Helps out a ton. And if you're new here to the Spawnwave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. And of course, members for the channel do get Newswave early. If you would like to learn more about that, click the join button or link in the description down below. And we're going to start today with 007 First Light. That was slated to come out at the end of March 2026. I say was because it's now been delayed. We can see this over on their social media account saying, today we are sharing an update regarding 007 First Light, as we have decided to move the game's release by 2 months to the 27th of May. Now, they do go on to say that this additional time of 2 months will give them more time to be able to polish the game, and they did mention that it is fully playable from beginning to end, so they're mostly going to focus in on refining the experience. And look, when they showed us that uncut footage, that gameplay, it looked kind of choppy at times. The frame rate was struggling, so I don't mind them taking a few extra months because let's face it, if the game came out busted, we would have probably waited several weeks anyway for some kind of patch to make the game playable. That's just tends to be what happens now with a lot of these big AAA games as it is. So I'd rather wait a couple of months for a higher quality product that maybe even will make it out on the disc at that point for something like the PlayStation 5. The Switch 2 game key card, so you're kind of just downloading the latest version anyway when you put the cartridge in. Still, though, look towards that now, end of May, where you got to wait a couple more months for that one next year. Also, if you were someone who managed to buy Cyberpunk on the Switch 2 and it was down to just under $18, there were some concerns that maybe these different purchases would be revoked and then refunded. Actually, not the case. We could see this, though. This is over on CD Projekt Red's social media account, saying the discounts for Cyberpunk 2077 and The Witcher 3 Complete Edition displayed on the Switch 2 eShop in the Americas on December 22nd, 2025 were incorrect. The situation is a result of an error we made when submitting the discount. We have corrected the error, and new discounts have now been applied. By the way, I think it's $40 now. Still pretty good for the Ultimate Edition, I'd say. They say the purchases made at the previous discount rate are unaffected by this change. There you go. If you have your system in airplane mode right now, just to make sure they can't get to your digital purchase and revoke it or something, you should be good. It seems like they realize, oh, that's kind of our bad, so hey, if you bought it, and that's kind of the way it goes. It was us who messed that one up. So hey, if you got Cyberpunk for like $18 yesterday or the other day, because they did pull that back fairly quick, a few hours later, really, but if you managed to get in right under the buzzer, hey, you got Cyberpunk at a pretty good deal. Oh, and I figured I would point this out because last time I mentioned it, people thought it was cool to see these prices, but they got snapped up pretty quick, and that has to do with Amiibos seeing some pretty steep discounts over on Best Buy, like you can see, and it appears to be mostly the Street Fighter ones being marked all the way down to $5. Yeah, that's $35 off. So I don't know what's going on there with Best Buy and marking them down so much other than, hey, we just want to get rid of these. I mean, it says the deal ends literally tomorrow. So hey, if you're around a Best Buy or you want to put the order in to get that deal, you can. There were a few Zelda related ones that I saw that were also marked down, but those are mostly like half off, not like 80% off. So hey, I mean, look, $15, you can get all the different Street Fighter Amiibos. It's they obviously feel very, very expensive for a purchase like that at $40. A bit more manageable when it's $5 for one of those things. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with Microsoft and the Switch 2. Now, it's possible they could also be moving stuff over to the Switch 1. It's still kind of up in the air, but just sort of based on where we are right now in the generation and how Microsoft and Activision are currently moving with something like Call of Duty, I'm kind of thinking they may just be setting their sights on the Switch 2 at this point. Well, while they did sign that deal with Nintendo years ago for Activision Blizzard, the 10-year deal with Call of Duty, really haven't seen it bear any fruit Up to now, it seems, because it looks like in the next couple of months, we should see their first outing on the Switch 2 with the Call of Duty franchise. At least that's according to see this. This is over on Pure Xbox, where they are quoting Jez Corden from Windows Central saying, the first Call of Duty Switch version is nearly done and launching in a few months. Goes on to say, I wouldn't say close, but it's on the way and hitting milestones looking at 2026. Now, Jez did mention that the reason they've kind of been having to wait for Call of Duty to get out there for the Switch 2, again, that's what I'm kind of tying it to, it's because they're waiting for dev kits. And that's not a new thing. How many times we talk about dev kits, the Switch 2, it being a whole thing, apparently, people getting in line and just still waiting at some pretty prominent studios, really, for a Switch 2 dev kit. Well, it does seem like Microsoft is starting to figure that out, as we are seeing announcements of things like even South of Midnight showing up next year. Of course, Indiana Jones. There's been word that Starfield would be showing up next year on the Switch 2. So yeah, you figure Call of Duty would most likely be making that move as well. But then it comes back to which Call of Duty, because Black Ops 7, while that is the newest one right now, I mean, it's not exactly lighting the world on fire. I mean, we see in the Circana report, it did still top the month of November, at least the last tracking period that they did that covered the majority of November, but it's still behind Battlefield for the entire year. And it seems, just based on the way that Activision's kind of talked about Call of Duty, even, I mean, kind of just apologizing to the fan base, not exactly the strongest performing edition out of the gate. So if I had to take a guess with Call of Duty, I'm kind of envisioning them moving over Warzone. That's their ongoing live service battle royale for Call of Duty, and it's one that's just always ongoing. So they're always updating it. It's in their Call of Duty application that I also figure they're going to have on the Switch 2. Would they get this on the Switch 1? That feels like that'd be kind of tough for Warzone. Now, they do have a mobile version of Warzone, so I also wonder in my mind, would they do with this thing where they would do a mobile version on the Switch 1, but then on the Switch 2 it gets the full version of Call of Duty Warzone? Maybe. I do think, though, next year, when we get to holiday 2026, there will be a little Switch 2 logo next to all the other versions of the game, and most likely I figure they would leave behind the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One, as it's still trying out there. That PS4 for 2013, still desperately trying to run this game, and it's a struggle, I will say that. So then, really, to me, how would it run on the Switch 2? That, I think, is the biggest question mark, and the biggest part of this this is really interesting, is how is this going to look? How is it going to run on the Switch 2? What features will they take advantage of? Will it have gyro aiming will it have mouse support? That could be a pretty big benefit if the frame rate is good for tracking with that mouse in Call of Duty Warzone, or even whatever they do next, which the word right now is that it's another Modern Warfare. And to be fair, I mean, look, they did Black Ops, Modern Warfare, so they said they wouldn't do 2 years in a row of the same one, and technically Modern Warfare next year would be living up to that. They wouldn't be going back on their word there, but it's like, okay, now we're back to Modern Warfare. Still, I do wonder how the overall audience on the Switch 2 will respond to something like the next Modern Warfare, even Warzone showing up, as free-to-play games like Fortnite have done very, very well on the platform. So interesting stuff to keep an eye out here, and it seems like maybe this is something that we can expect at the front half of 2026, as opposed to waiting all the way to next holiday for Call of Duty to finally show up on the platform. Next up, let's talk about Toys for Bob and what they could have in the works right now. See, with Toys for Bob, they were able to spin off from Microsoft, which was Activision Blizzard, right? They were able to remove themselves from the equation there and go completely independent. But on the way out, it seemed like they figured out a contract of some kind with Microsoft to continue developing some sort of game for Microsoft, which we would assume at that point, if they're with Microsoft and signing a deal, it'd be for something that Microsoft or Activision Blizzard owns. Maybe it was something that they were already working on at the time and they wanted to keep working on it, because if you then set off on your own as an independent studio, it can be kind of tough, right? Just in terms of finances and stuff. So that would at least kind of set them up for at least a path of success and just be able to work in the industry with maybe a well-known IP. In fact, some are thinking that we may know now what they're working on, and it's not necessarily going to be a surprise for everyone out there, but it is fun to see this kind of in writing here. And you can see this is over on Reddit, and they're sourcing Canadian guy who did have images of this LinkedIn post here. This is from Donald Yatomi, who they seem to bounce around from different studios, but you can see senior concept artist at Toys for Bob with Activision Blizzard. That was from August 2022 to March 2024, and they seem to list some things they were working on, which did include Call of Duty and Spyro. Now, one of the reasons it seemed that Toys for Bob maybe wanted to spin off from Activision Blizzard and Microsoft is because they were indeed just kind of working on Call of Duty. And that's how it went for a lot of the studios there. It was almost all hands on deck there for a while because Call of Duty just got more and more difficult to create every single year to where everyone was working on it. And I would assume Toys for Bob was like, that's not really what we want to do all the time. And they figured a way out. But did they take Spyro with them? Not like the IP, they own Spyro, but a contract to keep developing a Spyro game. That is the question now, and people are thinking, oh, well, it makes sense because Toys for Bob, there are a few franchises you expect them to create. Okay, they're going to do a Crash Bandicoot. That makes sense. They would do a Banjo-Kazooie. They would do a Spyro the Dragon. So if they are making a new Spyro game, it does all line up, and it would be really cool to see maybe in an Xbox Developer Direct, we'll say, in 2026, you see the purple dragon come flying in, and there's Toys for Bob's logo, and yeah, it's a new Spyro the Dragon. After Crash 4 and the quality of that game, which was very, very good, people were thinking they would go on and do a Spyro game, and there were rumors around that. It's just nothing's really come from it so far. So while this is a LinkedIn post, they could very well just be the person saying, hey, I've worked on Call of Duty and I've worked on Spyro in the past. It definitely leaves some interpretation there of, yeah, they actually did some work on the new Spyro game that technically hasn't been announced yet, and that's why they just kind of threw up Spyro in their post. But definitely something to keep an eye on here with Toys for Bob going into 2026. Because that would be a lot of fun to have Microsoft show up, announce it, and then say, hey, it's coming out within the next year, Spyro's back. So we'll keep an eye out for that one. Next up, let's talk about Nvidia GeForce Now. Okay, so all the discussion currently is around prices and hardware and how everything is just going through the roof because of all this DRAM shortage with AI data centers really eating up the vast majority of the market share for parts that are available. So some are wondering if these companies, the main strategy is to push you towards the idea of, well, just cloud gaming. And look, cloud gaming isn't new. It's been around for a long time. It's mostly been pitched as convenience, as like almost a secondary way to play games if your primary way, like a gaming PC or something, isn't available to you right then and there because it's at home and you're on the road or you're traveling or visiting a friend's house or something. To me, that's always made sense. Or even a way to try out a game without downloading 130 gigabytes, right? Like all of that does make sense, that secondary feature. But what if it was your primary way to play games? That's something that's been floated now for at least the last few years and is becoming more and more of a talking point now as we see RAM and other things going up in price, especially around video cards going into 2026. And you know what? Wouldn't shock me if maybe Nvidia would like to see that because they have their own subscription service that you would subscribe to use hardware that they own. Like they just keep it in their data centers, right? So here's the thing with GeForce Now, if you had been signed up for it and just kind of been renewing the whole way through, you wouldn't have really had any hard limits placed on your account as to how many hours per month that you can play until now. See, they did incorporate a 100-hour limit for new signups, but they left the people who were previously signed up grandfathered in for basically unlimited playtime. Well, that's ending January 1st. We can see this. This is over on PC Games N, saying from January 1st, 2026, nearly all users of GeForce Now will be subject to its monthly playtime cap. The new NVIDIA GeForce Now 100-hour cap will only be avoidable if you have a coveted Founders Edition subscription, with all other users having to pay a surcharge of up to $6 per extra 15 hours of game time if they exceed the 100-hour limit. The 100-hour cap has been in place since November 2024, but again, it didn't necessarily affect existing users. They were exempt, and that again will end January 1st. So this is something, again, that's been brought up a lot, is as these prices go up and up and up, and it costs thousands and thousands of dollars to build what, 5 years ago would be considered even mid-range, maybe upper mid-range. It's like, does it make more sense to eventually get to a position where you're just renting all of your hardware and not even having to put it together or have it around you? It's always in the cloud. I will at least say this. NVIDIA GeForce Now is a good experience. If you've used it, you're like, yeah, it's close. It's not perfect in terms of native experience. It's just going to be better in terms of latency and stuff that way. but it's really close. In fact, I would say right now, just the overall experience of moving your mouse and then the thing on the screen moving, a cursor, a crosshair, whatever, right? It's that's the closest I think I've seen it come to 1-to-1, and it's better than pretty much everyone else, whether Sony or Microsoft. It's so weird to me that Microsoft feels like they're the ones behind the curve with a lot of this cloud streaming stuff, but they kind of are. Even Stadia was ahead of them. And like you saw what happened to Stadia. They got that out of there quick. Google was like, nah, this isn't working. We gave it like 8 months, we're out. So with this, the thing is, it's going to get interesting. Again, as prices around hardware goes up and up and up, maybe people will continue to just sort of subscribe to these services instead of upgrade their video card or even buy a PC. And then it's an endless cycle of just subscribing, almost like Netflix, but then to use PC hardware. By the way, for games that you have to also still buy through Steam and stuff, it's all predicated around prices that are just out of reach for everyday consumers and them having to succumb to the, I don't know, 10, 11, 12. Let's face it, these prices would go up constantly as it is, right? With streaming services, Netflix, and you imagine eventually it's, oh yeah, to use the PCs that we have built here, the 3080s or, 5080s or whatever, at that time, years in the future, it's like, yeah, it's $30 a month. But it certainly beats having to build that $5,000 PC. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about something pretty cool that's happened in the retro scene, especially on the side of like the homebrew scene, as this has to do with The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. We can see this. This is over on Time Extension saying it's been fully decompiled. Now, for a while, people have been keeping an eye on this because it's been in the 90% or so, and it was slowly creeping up to 100%. But as of now, it appears it is done. It's been decompiled to its source code. Now, Video Game Esoterica went over it in a video. You can check out more about that in the sources, of course, down below in the description. But this is interesting because, look, so Twilight Princess, of course, came out on the GameCube and the Wii, but it is one that people look back on very fondly because it was finally Nintendo going, you know what, we'll give you that realistic looking Zelda game after everything that happened with Wind Waker. And it was a legitimately good looking game. But, it's just about 20 years old, something like that. So you start to look at that and go, well, what could they do if it was decompiled to its source code? And you could have full native ports, say, to PC. You could have entire map editors being implemented. You could do all kinds of cool stuff when it comes to ray tracing or frame rate. Like, there's a ton of stuff you can do here, as we've seen with some other decompilation projects. Like, Mario 64 went crazy when it got decompiled. It is worth pointing out that not every game that gets decompiled necessarily gets that same treatment. Mario 64 did because it's Mario 64. It's a great game. It's incredibly popular. People wanted to do all kinds of stuff to that game to, I guess you could say, more or less modernize it, but even just go, what's this game look like with ray tracing? I don't know, let's find out. So I do think, though, with Twilight Princess, it is that kind of game where people will want to experiment and mess around with the game and this newly decompiled source code to see what is possible with, the late GameCube, the early Wii release. And I am very interested to see how good this game can look, but also all kinds of weird modification stuff people come up with. And before we go to the comments of the day, we'll take a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday, which is Game of the Year Madness Day 7. It was Ghost of Yotei versus Doom: The Dark Ages, and it looks like Ghost of Yotei is going to eke this one out by about 10%. This is the closest we've seen so far, and when I saw the bracket coming together, this is the first one I circled as, okay, this is going to be an interesting matchup. But on 16,000 votes so far, 55% versus 45%. It was a good matchup. It was, and again, there's a few other first round matchups that I think will be similar to this, where it's within 10%, and those are really, really fun to see how they transpire. But there's also some juggernauts here ahead of Ghost of Yotei and Doom of the Dark Ages that I don't necessarily want to look forward too much in the bracket, but it's going to be a tough hill to climb, I'll say, for Ghost of Yotei or Doom the Dark Ages, as it appears Ghost of Yotei is coming out of this. Either one of them is going to be an interesting test coming up. And we'll finish up with the comment of the day, as you're seeing here. This is from Original, who says, the next Zelda game is not dropping for another 5 years or more. Wow, we're going all the way out to 2030. Or 2031 for this one even. And it's been 2.5 years since Tears of the Kingdom, a little more than that. I don't know, 5 years out seems too far. Now, they could obviously tease the game years in advance, and we'll really know where we are once they show the game or mention it in some capacity, because it's going to come down to how much they show us. But I sort of look at the next big Zelda game as a 2028 thing. And the question I have is, what path are they going to take here? Is it still going to build on the open world formula? Will it go back to more of a traditional dungeon-based formula, or will it be a better mix of the two, I'll say, than what we saw with Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom? So to me, that's the biggest thing. Where exactly are we heading with the structure, or do they have some brand new idea in mind that'll completely flip the franchise all over again? And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today. If you missed yesterday's Newswave, I'll leave it up here in a card. Or maybe you want to take a trip back to 2018 and see how good the Black Friday deals were back then. You might be kind of shocked at how a few of those systems were priced compared to where we are now. I looked at that in a video and I'll leave it right below. Thanks guys for watching. Have a great holiday. If you're celebrating Christmas, have a great Christmas. If not, have a fun day off work, and I will see you back here next Monday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern time for Newswave.